Looking ahead to the government agenda for the year to come, you promised at the SNP conference in the autumn that you would reboot the independence campaign this spring. If COVID persists, and it very possibly might, does that mean that you can't commit to another referendum in 2023?
Look, my plans haven't changed from what I set out at the end of last year, which is, and remember, it's not yet a year since my party overwhelmingly won an election on the basis of this prospectus, that I want to give the people of Scotland the opportunity to choose independence before the end of 2023. We will take the steps this year, both in terms of the practical preparations, but also the substantive case on independence to enable that to happen.
So that would include an independence referendum bill at Holyrood. When might that be introduced then?
I'm not going to give you a date for that because we haven't taken the decision on that, but what I will say, and I'm not saying anything I haven't said before, is that we intend to do that in a timescale that enables the commitment that we won the election to have a referendum before the end of 2023 to happen. Just
to allow that to happen then, so this might have to be, some people would predict, say, the bill would need to come before Holyrood before Easter, because it may take some time for that to pass through Holyrood, possibly into next year. There's the likelihood of a court challenge to it, and that all pushes your timetable back.
Well, look, I'm not in I hope there won't be a court challenge to it, but I'm not in charge of that. The UK government will have to.
But it is a possibility, so that would push your timetable back.
What I can say to you right now is that I intend to do everything that is within my power to enable that referendum to happen before the end of 2023, and we will set out exactly what that means in terms of the date of introduction of legislation when we've taken the detailed decisions around that. But more importantly, well, it's not more importantly because obviously the enabling the referendum is important, but actually what I think is much more exciting as we come out, I hope, of the pandemic, and certainly the acute phase of the pandemic, are the opportunities that come with Scotland being independent, so that we're not having in future to suffer what we've suffered over the past couple of years of being taken out of Europe against our will, of having all of the implications of that, of being governed by Boris Johnson and his band of Brexiteers, but instead being able to choose our own path and our own destiny as a country. I think that's thoroughly positive, and I think that kind of debate is quite energising as we come out of a global pandemic.
With us, the journalist and pro-independence campaigner Ruth Wishart, the political commentator and former advisor to the Scottish Conservatives Andy McKeever, and STV's Westminster correspondent Catherine Sampson. Thank you all for joining us. So, Andy, you were listening to the First Minister there. She's sounding bullish about the prospect of an independence referendum. Can you see it happening in the timescale she was talking about?
No, I don't think it will. I should caveat really by saying that I think there is a mandate quite clearly for a referendum, and I think there should be one from that point of view. And I also think the unionists would be well advised strategically to have a referendum. I think they should have one as well. All of that being said, the big difficulty, I think, for Nicola Sturgeon is that she's trying to promise something which is not in her gift. I think she gave that away a little bit by, in the interview, saying that she'd do everything in her power, and she emphasised in her power, because the reality is it's not in her power, it's in Boris Johnson's power. And he has shown really no signs whatsoever of changing his view on simply saying no to a referendum. I think there's a possibility that might change depending on what the result is in the 2023 general election, if we have it then. But even if that is a strong result for the SNP that makes the government change its mind somehow, there's still very, very little chance, in my view, that there's going to be a referendum in the timescale she set out, which is the end of 2023.
What do you make of that, Ruth?
Well, I don't really agree with Andy. It's hardly going to be a surprise to Andy. I think it was quite interesting what she said tonight, because she re-emphasised that she was going to do everything in her power, as Andy says, to have it within that timescale. Now, let's remember there was already there's already been an act gone through the Scottish Parliament which outlines the logistics of a referendum. There's also an oven-ready piece of legislation, the Scottish Independence Referendum Bill, which can be put through quite quickly because there is a majority in Parliament for that. It is, of course, quite right to say that it may not entirely be within her power. But on the other hand, nobody has actually proven legally that the permission of Boris Johnson is required. That might be the subject of a legal challenge. But at the moment, the jury's still out as to whether or not that's required. So I personally, there's one other factor I could just quickly say. I think Nicola Sturgeon, better perhaps than anybody, realises that she cannot delay this much longer without losing a lot of support from her own foot soldiers.
And Catherine, would a Holyrood referendum bill be challenged by the UK government, do you think?
Well, we've seen before the Scottish Secretary, Alistair Jack, quoted in a paper saying the UK would be bound to formally question it. What's interesting is you don't hear many other ministers really being quite as strong as that, including Michael Gove, and especially after the Holyrood referendum result in May, there are many ministers who prefer just not to be drawn on this topic before. I think there is a concern from them that if they're talking that way already about something hypothetical, there could be a backlash, that this could be weaponised against them by the SNP, who would say, you know, they're planning ways to try and thwart democracy.
Moving on to the GRA.
The thing is, though, Ruth and I don't disagree really on the actual referendum. I mean, we both think there should be one. It's just a question of practicality and where the power lies in this particular instance. We're talking about next year. It's just not going to happen next year.
OK, well, Ruth, come back on that then very quickly.
Well, just can I just make one very quick point, John? I know you want to move on, but let's just remember that the Brexit referendum was supposed to be advisory, and a lot of people have said we can't have a referendum in Scotland that was advisory because the unionists would all just boycott it. I mean, Brexit was an advisory referendum, and now it's morphed into the sacred will of the people somehow or other.